Hello and welcome. This is the Fit for Privacy podcast, the podcast for professionals. I'm your host Punit Bhatia. In this podcast, we talk to influencers so that you get to listen and learn from their experiences and thoughts. Remember, this is not legal advice, and if you need one, please contact a professional with your situation. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. Today we are in Fit for Privacy podcast and we have with us Joanna Vandemer, who is a DPO and Privacy and Protection Officer at Center for Innovation in University of Leiden. So welcome, Joanna.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. And if I may ask if you can introduce yourself and also elaborate, why do you segregate between this DPO and Privacy and Protection Officer? If you can get us into that.
Yeah, sure. So, as you know, work in data privacy at the university. Surprisingly enough, didn't study to become this. Studied international relations and international studies with a very strong focus on conflict prevention. And as I started discovering that a lot of the way the world's digitizing, a lot of the issues that we're going to face in all sectors are related to data. So I became more of a data expert. And then because I have a very strong interest in protection of people in vulnerable situations, or I'm very passionate about people, I realized that if us experts are not paying attention to what's happening on the digital realm, these vulnerable people are going to have their rights violated. They're going to be exploited in ways that they might not necessarily be able to protect themselves from. So that's how I got into this. The reason we've separated the data protection officer and a privacy and protection lead is I was originally just the data protection officer, and that was very much focused on GDPR compliance. But then we got a new director who found it very interesting that I kept saying that we as a center should aim to move beyond just our legal obligations. That should be the foundation upon which we base all of our ways of working. But there are elements that are not covered by the law, especially when you're working in innovation. You're working with technologies that aren't explicitly covered. And so the idea was how to move beyond that, and that was where the privacy and protection lead came out, is that we're not just looking at
being the data protection legal.
The legal element, and not just GDPR. We work with a lot of partner organizations who are not, they don't fall under the GDPR, or they're working with populations in countries that don't fall under the GDPR. So there is that idea that it's more about the people. So our line is people first in innovation. And how do we focus on the people rather than just the law? And so privacy and protection lead is a position that's a little bit more open to that element of evolution that exists within technological innovation, and how to make sure that we're protecting people and protecting their right to privacy at the same time.
Very interesting. And you say just DPO. I mean, the DPO in itself is for some people too big of a role. They need a data protection office or officer and so on, and they have a huge staff. And you say just DPO. That was the one takeaway.
I think that kind of relates. We're a small organization, so I only do the Center for Innovation. I don't represent the whole of Leiden University. Part of my job is to keep in line with what the university is doing in terms of their GDPR compliance. So they have 2 data protection officers, and they really do the entire university's compliance mechanisms, their steps that they're going to take. But because we help the university introduce new technologies, and we prepare them for the digital future. So chatbots, we experiment with a whole bunch of different technologies. And what we've started to do is, as we help introduce that into an organization, we couple that with advice
Interesting.
on what kind of privacy and protection issues or risks you're going to face, and some kinds of recommendations for how you can mitigate those risks. Partly because if you look at, for instance, data protection courses for the GDPR, you have the emerging technologies focus, which is the grey areas of the law.
Right.
And when I did my certification at Maastricht for the data protection officer, every question I asked the expert, they said, "Oh, that's in the grey area of the law. That works in the grey area of the law." And I thought to myself, well, then our entire organization, a lot of the work
Right.
is in the grey areas of the law. So that's, for me, the data protection officer, a lot of that is there's a law. There are a lot of people working on it.
Right.
So you can get a lot of advice.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of a guidebook. There's a law with guidance on how to do it, having a Article 30 register. Whereas when you start in the grey areas, that's when you start having to think for yourself and try and understand the essence of the law. What were they trying to get at? How would that apply to a technology that they haven't explicitly spoken about? So the data protection officer part, for me, I find is the easiest one because there are so many people working on it.
Right.
When you get to the grey area, that's the one I find really difficult because you have to really research it, really document your findings, really speak to people about the essence of the law, which is when you start getting into ethics and those areas. For me, I find really difficult. I find that the more difficult part of my job.
That's certainly more challenging. I mean, the law is the law, but then interpreting it and applying it to the real life situations, people generally don't make the distinction.
Yeah.
They look at it all that together for the DPO.
Yeah.
But if you make that segregation, some things are straightforward, a very few that, you should have a data inventory, you should do a DPIA and so on. But what to do after that when the risks are there?
Yeah.
Is it going to impact the rights and freedoms of people or not?
Yeah.
And that's always a decision. You may have one decision, I may have something else, and the other person may have something else. So it's people specific rather than law specific.
Yeah, and it's also the evolution of the context.
Right, it's also.
Because the context might change, and a decision that was made yesterday when you interpreted the law in this context yesterday, today all of a sudden you're in a different context.
Right.
And the mechanism you set up yesterday isn't adequate for today. And that I find, that's also my favorite part. I like complex, challenging problems, and that's the part that really drives me.
Sure. So if I may ask, I mean, we don't need to, we don't seem to need warming up, but still, what do you love about this privacy job or privacy as a subject?
The context, contextualness of it, the fact that there is no two contexts that are the same.
Right.
And so you're constantly having to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And understand what kind of risks, to understand the risks to people's privacy and the possible impacts that could have on their lives, you have to really put yourself in their shoes. And I think that really is my favorite part, and I think probably the part that my degrees and my studies and the specializations I did during university helped me the most with, is that cultural understanding and the ability to contextually understand a different country, a different society, different cultures, because then you understand the privacy in a different light, in a different view, from a different perspective.
Indeed. And is there something you hate about privacy, don't like about privacy?
I guess the fact that it's so contextual could also be something you don't like. I mean, you know, as a privacy expert, sometimes it gets so complex that it can feel a bit overwhelming, I would say. Yeah,
the interpretation of the law sometimes, and in implementing or making suggestions in a context, because people come to you saying you are the DPO, you are the privacy officer, so you'll know it. But it's not, we know it, we know the law, we know what it says, but we need to know what's your situation, what you're doing, and then need to infer what should be done in that, as you say, context. That's the right word. So it's both my favorite and my least liked part of privacy. Interesting. And if you were to describe GDPR in just one word, what that would be? Foundation. Wow. So you see it as a foundation towards something bigger.
Yeah, I think I think the attention that came with it and what it aimed to do, such as solidifying those fundamental rights, I think that is a first step in a very long and hard process we have to regaining control of privacy from private sector companies who are exploiting it, from lack of respect for those fundamental rights, lack of understanding of why those fundamental rights are fundamental rights in the first place. So I think it's the first step, and it was. So I'd been working with data responsibility and working with risks around data for a couple of years before GDPR came into effect, and I loved the fact that when it came into effect, I wasn't seen as this crazy person who's just always talking about privacy. People all of a sudden started coming. So we heard that you're really good at this privacy thing. Can you help us? Because so all of a sudden, people who had been ignoring it or putting it off wanted to pay attention.
They started to acknowledge your role and relevance into the situation, into the context.
Yeah, and they started thinking about privacy, which is my favorite part because they know their contexts. Like we've been talking about how contextual privacy is. They know the context of their work better than anybody else. They're the experts in their area.
Yep.
So having them think about privacy really helps because they can then understand how privacy would work in their area of work.
Right. That's one of the things I also say whenever I work with a client is you cannot have privacy responsible and he or she would take care of it. It's everybody's responsibility. Yeah. You can have a DPO or not. Okay, a decision to be made. You can assign somebody as a privacy champion, a decision to be made, or a sponsor, or whatever you want to call him. But end of the day, everyone in your company is responsible for privacy.
Yeah.
And that's very hard to convince them.
Yeah, I think you've hit on one of the hardest parts of privacy too, is the convincing people of the importance.
Right.
I think the stance I took and the way we've really started to develop it is showing how it would be a tool for them in their own life. And I think that's also helped them put themselves in the shoes of the people who we're trying to protect. And I think we've seen a massive increase of people coming to me. I get people coming to me at least twice a week with a completely different issue I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
And saying to me, we think this might become an issue with privacy if we continue to work this way, or if we, it doesn't say it in the law that we shouldn't be allowed to do this, but we think it's maybe not ethical.
Exactly.
And so then they come, do you mind helping us figure out how to do this more ethically, or how to do it in the data responsible way that you are teaching us about? Also, a lot of them started to protect their own data.
Nice.
In ways, I mean, some of them do it more than I do, which has been, it makes you feel a little bit guilty as a privacy officer when you see somebody better at handling their own private data than you are. That's when you know you've done your job well, right?
Exactly. That's when you feel the satisfaction of working for what you're doing day in, day out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You used a term called data responsible or data responsibility quite a few times.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? What, according to you, is data responsibility?
So I know that it's a term that most humanitarian sector people will have heard, hopefully, because it really came out of that area of work that we did. We had a group called the International Data Responsibility Group, of which one of my colleagues was the secretary, and it was there were a couple of organizations that were members of it, and we would host conferences to discuss data privacy and protection risks in the humanitarian sector. And so it came from that when we started seeing that we wanted to move beyond just the law. We thought that framework of thinking that the humanitarian sector was exploring was one that could be applicable to more than just one sector. So I spent about a year exploring what are the elements that they talk about in the humanitarian sector when they talk about data responsibility, and how can we distill that into a set amount of categories that you need to look at when you are trying to be responsible with data. And
So for our listeners then,
yeah.
it's a concept you have borrowed or taken from the humanitarians. Is that? And it is now the central theme or the concept on which the center is working on how you see GDPR or data privacy compliance. Is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say taken it from them. I think they were the first there because of the context that they work in.
Okay.
They work with very vulnerable populations in tense contexts, conflict contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so I wouldn't say taken it. I think they were the first to be forced into looking at what
This responsibility.
and when you're working with people's data and you're working with innovation,
Mm-hmm.
and especially technological innovation, what is your responsibility as the organization implementing that? So I think they were the first to a very important concept that needs to be applied across sectors.
Okay.
And so we've distilled it down to 7 elements. And
So you made a framework?
Yeah, we have a framework. It is
Interesting.
available on our website. So we say that you need to look at ethics, technology, the legal elements, governance, process, people, and network. If you want to be a
Interesting.
truly responsible organization,
Mm-hmm.
those are the elements. And I think where you'll see GDPR falling is into the legal. Those are
Right.
your legal obligations that you have. But for instance, international organizations are exempt from GDPR. So they don't fall under the same legal obligations. They do try and adhere to some of the principles,
Mm-hmm.
but they can't be taken to court the same way you or I working with a company can be.
When you say that legal organizations are exempt,
International organizations.
yeah, international organizations, normally we say that if they are processing the personal data of EU citizens, they need to comply with the law.
Oh, but that's
That's a
that's
like
a
legal
different-
part.
Yeah, but that's a different. That's a multinational versus an
Right.
IO, an official IO, so the United Nations, ICRC.
Okay, that way.
Those are international organizations who are exempt from a lot of local legal regimes.
Oh, okay, so you're talking that
Yeah, I'm
category.
talking the category in international law classified as officially international organizations. They also get exceptions for taxes. They're exempt
Okay.
from a lot of
Mm-hmm.
those obligations. So for them, that's one of the main focuses of, for instance, organizations who are GDPR, fall under GDPR,
Mm-hmm.
who have to work with an international organization who's exempt. There's a lot
Right.
of tension
Exactly.
on data sharing there. So that's a gray
That's a
area
gray
of the
area.
law that people are trying to figure out. So now you know why every time I asked a question, that's the gray area of the law. So
Yeah. No, I was thinking of gray meaning there are a lot of other things because normally in organizations people are talking of law,
yeah,
and then we convince them to say there's the ethics part and the culture part of it,
Yeah.
wherein you put yourself exactly the way you said it. You put yourself in the shoes of the customer
yeah,
and say, would you like that to be done?
yeah. I mean, precisely. I think you've
Yeah, but that's the ethics and that part. But when you look at data responsibility and your 7 areas, it's much bigger and much larger way a context of looking at it from different dimensions.
Yeah, and I think the key part, for instance, why I became privacy and protection lead, is I think the key part is that a lot of those do already happen in organizations, except they're siloed,
Mhm.
and they're done. They're not seen as one whole tool. So I think the difference that we learned from these is they were using all of these elements
Mhm.
as tools to be better at handling data. So they were using ethical tools to assess themselves. So the concept of do no harm, which comes from the medical sector,
Mhm.
you'll hear a man who I consider to be my mentor, he really explored that concept of do no harm from the medical sector and applying it to the way you handle data or innovation in vulnerable
Very nice.
contexts. Yeah,
Very
he's
interesting.
Nathaniel Raymond, works at Yale University.
Hmm.
So those are the kinds of conversations we looked at. What is everybody saying, and how does that distill into a tool that organizations can then use to become more responsible themselves? So this is the tool that we use to build our policy, which will then be a GDPR compliant policy
course.
because we have the legal element in it.
But it's much more than legal aspects.
But we have that ethics thing of, do we ask ourselves, even if it is legal, is it ethical?
And you asked that question in the same forum, same team, same committee?
So we developed this, and I am now tasked with really building that out. So we have 3 different areas that we really work on. We have the internal, so that's managing our own systems, the way we work. We have the project, so we have a number of projects that don't necessarily fall under data responsibility, but we try and build data responsibility elements into them to make sure that the way the data is being managed is according to these principles. And then you have the external part, which is where we conduct projects directly with partners, focusing purely on data responsibility and helping and that's where we partner with humanitarian organizations. The World Food Program we've had a couple of projects with, and so I'm currently building that out. But it's a new focus for us to actually be doing it as a service that we provide. That's a new area for us.
Very interesting. I think we can probably talk about it for days or weeks. Data responsibility. Yeah, you could. That's how I feel, and I could listen to that for maybe weeks, and I can do anything with it, a master's or a PhD, it seems. But in essence of time, and for our audiences, it's good to know that you focus on data responsibility and how you believed this should be the way to do it, because there are a lot of gray areas. But what was the driver, or why did you, as Center of Innovation, choose to go in that direction of data responsibility? What prompted you in the first place to even look out for something more than the GDPR? Because typically organizations would say, I need to comply with GDPR.
Yeah.
Then they pick the law, hire a person and say, this is the law and make me compliant. The smart ones maybe put a policy in between to say, this is our GDPR, rather than trying to have to factor in all the 270 pages every time.
Yeah.
So they write their own policy. But how did you end up or choose to focus on the data responsibility element, if I may ask?
That's an interesting question. I've never been asked. So I think it really was a combination of the fact that we already had a culture of talking about that specifically when we worked with humanitarian organizations. And I think it was also a combination of, so I'm very, increasingly through work I did outside of the center, so I worked with the Ministry of Defense of the Netherlands, looking at the digitization of soldiers and the risks and opportunities that it posed to those soldiers who were fighting in the battlefield. And also I did a bit of work with Harvard Humanitarian, where we were looking at early warning systems for mass atrocities. I think that really moved me beyond me as a person, beyond the looking just at the legal element, because those are areas where GDPR is not the primary concern, the life and death of people.
Right.
So I think that really moved me beyond me as a person, beyond just looking at the legal obligations. And I think it's also a receptive director. So we got a new director. And when she joined, we had a very good conversation about how I view it. And I think she's been the key factor that changed the way the center views it and has really driven it forward, and, for instance, given me the space to explore this topic and really see if we can offer it as a service for the center, because I, as a person, thought that we should. If we're going to recommend these technologies, we should be able to couple it with protecting people's rights. And I think it's the combination of her openness to it and my exposure to other things and other contexts that really led to that.
Most organizations I see, they grapple with GDPR, and the advanced ones, they will say, there's an ethical part of it, and let's set up an ethical committee. So they will have two streams going in. So data protection is more complying with the law, and the ethics is more broader data related or business related stream, where you're looking, would you like to do it to yourself as a customer? But I haven't seen this broad 7-element theory you're saying, let's do it like this. So
I mean, we think those two should be brought together. Because, and your cybersecurity team as well. And you should have my communications officer is incredible when it comes to thinking about how this would be implemented. So I think it really, the siloing, I think this we also found to stop that siloing, because that's one of the things I see that hinders organizations is having all these decisions and it's not one coherent plan. The ethical stance can really help you with the legal obligations. Your tech team, if you are struggling to do something ethically, your tech team might have a very good way to do it more ethically. So they have to be together. They just have to. And it seems like a given to me, but I very often I see an organization and they have it separated.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, because normally organizations would, as I said, look at it like that. But if you look at it, data responsibility, it kind of cuts across silos, which is a big challenge. You'll have the communications coming in the end, not being part, or sometimes being part of it, but not being so aware. So it's very interesting. Moving on, when you do this data responsibility and the data privacy part, what comes out as the biggest challenge? Because you may have, I think, very different challenge from some of us who are focused on primarily the legal or sometimes the ethical aspect of it. We do talk about culture, but that's where we leave it. For us, if we establish a privacy culture, it's big. But what's your biggest challenge or concern?
Oh, that's a hard question.
Yeah, it is.
I think organizationally or as a person, as an individual who has to, because the biggest challenge as an organization is, I think once you awaken people, the immensity of the responses you get once you've started. There's the term that they use in cybersecurity that your people are your sensors. Once you've activated those sensors, you have to be prepared for the amount of feedback you're going to get. And I think that was a challenge for me, because I didn't expect that switching on to happen so quickly. I'm really happy with it, and I couldn't be more proud, or I don't want to say proud, but impressed with how quickly people I work with switched on. And that is promising, and I think made me even more excited that we could really start a change in how people view data and privacy. But the biggest challenge was then also being prepared for the amount of feedback.
So that's the personal part.
Yeah,
but I think we all would love to have that challenge rather than have the challenge of activating people.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's I think. But
that's the first challenge, and then the next one.
But that's why my communications officer is, I think, one of the people I connect with most on a daily basis, because any presentation I give, anything I write, anything, I'm always asking her to tell me, would this get through with that audience? Do you think this is the right wording? Because you have to, if you want people to buy in, you really have to be tailoring it to their context. Because I think the only way people can be switched on that quickly is if they can relate it to their own lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now privacy is a profession for us, and I see you're very passionate about privacy, and we do make a living out of it, but then it becomes boring for people who are not so into privacy. Sometimes it becomes like, why do you always talk about privacy? And sometimes it's like, okay, we'll do it just because you are saying it. But how do you feel others, or how do you feel we can make it interesting for others?
Isn't that if I had the answer to that, I'd be a
You'll be the
millionaire.
genie.
I'd be the person to go to.
We all try to make it interesting. We all try to develop privacy cultures. We all try to make it interesting, simple, easy, but end of the day, I think, like I've said before, I think relating it to their own personal lives, I think is the important part. And I think also, there's this understanding the privacy challenge, and understanding privacy is very difficult. It's a very complex issue that we're facing. And
it's very, I think, still unclear just how big the challenge is that we face. So I'm currently reading the book Surveillance Capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a privacy expert. I knew a lot of it, and even
then
I was kind of almost scared off by how big the challenge is. Luckily, I love challenges, so it's quite easy for me to get over that initial reaction, but it's hard to understand. It's a very long book and it's very comprehensive, but she goes over just how we got into the situation we're in now. And it's really complex, and I think if people like you and I who like it, are passionate about it, have the time or the interest in reading those types of books or getting that information, if we could better communicate it without causing fear. I think there's a lot of fear mongering that happens. People they are gonna violate our privacy, and it's can we just constructive conversation is something I think lacks, especially between sectors, and really patiently take the time to explain it to people without scaring them. I think we'd have a whole different conversation, but the fear mongering is, I think, the biggest thing. And also trying to help people get over the helplessness of it. Because when you think about it, the most conversation is consumers should take ownership over their data. They should demand their rights. It's a very easy thing to say until you start trying to understand what the current legal regimes are that say where your rights are and end, and just try and get somebody who isn't a legal expert to understand the GDPR.
Yeah.
It's such a easy thing to expect every consumer to be able to do that, but it's not going to happen because it's too complex. It's so complex, and that's kind of another reason we chose this focus with data responsibility. The more complex the technology becomes, the harder it is to understand where the data is going, who has your data, so I think getting people like you and I to communicate through podcasts,
other media,
simple ways of explaining things that people may not have the time to read, and then also understanding that it is our responsibility. There is a responsibility on those of us who have the expertise, the ability to understand it, the time to understand it, to try and protect those who can't. Because I think there is a lot of people who are trying to get through their lives and saying that they should start demanding their rights. They should be sending GDPR request emails to every company that has their data. How many apps do you have on your phone?
Maybe 50 or 60.
So you can imagine it's and I think there's the conversation needs to change. That's my biggest.
I think the conversation needs to change, and also the perspective of everybody who's giving out their data needs to change. At the moment, it's kind of giving in to the fate and saying we can't control it. It's too late. This is just a retrospective aspect, because laws tend to follow technology. So technology leads. They go forward, and then the law comes along. And by then, sometimes there's a perspective. Some people say it's too late. And you also mentioned, but do you believe that it's still possible to rein in control and get people in control of their data?
Yes, I have to. I'm an optimistic person. I don't think it'll be easy. I think I think there's massive cultural changes that need to take place. I think a lot of the reasons people don't have control are not necessarily directly related to data itself. I think, for instance, let's take the idea that a lot of us app users, technology users, are no longer the customers, but we are the raw material that's producing data for companies who then have other customers who use that behavioral data or our data for the actual money. That's where the actual money is. I think that's also a result of us as customers, and myself included, being very used to free apps, free, not having to pay for these things. And that's also wider to the economic crisis, it's economic climate. I think it's wider than just data privacy, but getting prepared for having to become the customer again. And when you are the customer, there is a financial transaction that takes place. And that's, you see the conversations about, we'll pay people for their data.
Right.
I think the terms of service agreements, I think those would be a lot stronger if there was a financial transaction taking place. I think do I think it can change? Yes. Do I think it will? I guess we'll have to see how many people are prepared to take up that fight.
True. And I think we don't know if it'll simply go into pure control dimension or a financial transaction dimension. But either way, it'll not be one-way traffic. It won't be that companies are using data and their consumers don't know and have no control. Even if it's a financial reward or financial transaction, it's a means to control what you give in and when and how much.
Because if you're being paid for your data, you know how much you should, if everything is honest, you should know how much you're giving them then. Because it should, I think it's a massive...
At least there's
change.
Transparency.
Yeah.
And that's what we are aiming for in all these laws.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to unfortunately close this one. So if I may ask you, believe me, this was a very useful conversation, and I'm sure the audiences will react positively. However, just before I close, what would be your one key message for everyone who's involved in privacy or otherwise?
One key message.
You can have two, but one or two.
Well, I always have the one that I aim at young people or students work at a university. There's the one that I always aim at them, and that is, you don't have to wait until you're finished your degrees to get involved in this conversation. You also have something to contribute from the get-go.
Yeah.
I started working at Ministry of Defence as a second year bachelor's student. So I think people need to realize that they have an impact and have the ability to have an impact with novel insights much earlier than they think they do. And never to think that their questions are done. The number of times I've given talks or presentations and I get a young person or somebody who is maybe inexperienced, they don't have 10 years of experience, saying, starting their question with, this may be a dumb question, or I'm just a bachelor's student. And that always really gets me, because I don't believe in dumb questions, because you might be asking a fundamental question that somebody's overlooked because they've been doing it for 10 years.
Right.
And anybody who's an expert should be able to answer that dumb question perfectly. And if they can't, they don't know what they're doing. So I don't think it's a dumb question. You're making people remain alert to what they're doing.
So keep asking questions.
Yeah. No matter what the question is, just ask it, and don't start it with, it might be a dumb question.
Sure.
And then I think for everybody else, do I have a key message? Yeah, I think we need to start thinking very hard about where we're going. Yeah. And we need experts from all areas to be thinking about how technology is going to affect their area. Because right now I think it's very limited to data scientists, programmers. I think we need humanities, we need social sciences, we need all these people who understand the culture, who understand society, to be looking into technology and data privacy and how it's going to affect the groups that they're experts on. So
interesting. So for you, privacy is for everyone, the whole society.
Yeah.
I think that's the essence of GDPR as well.
Yeah, which is why I love it.
Yeah, that's why we are all in this thing so passionately.
Yeah.
Day in, day out.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it was a great talk, very insightful, and I love the concept of data responsibility, and I will look at your websites to see more and maybe find out ways to know more about it.
I mean, if you have any feedback on it, my email address is up there. I love critical feedback on things I've
And you're okay for the audiences also to give feedback. That's good to know. So we'll post the link to your website underneath the podcast so that people can react.
Perfect.
So thanks for being here. As I said, it was a great pleasure having you, and have a great time protecting and being responsible on data.
Thanks.
So thanks everyone for tuning in. This was Joanna van der Merwe from Center for Innovation at University of Leiden. Thanks, stay blessed, and speak to you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked this effort. Please do click like, comment and share. It is okay if you did not like it. Please still do make a comment and share with us what we can improve. If you have suggestions, ideas for guests, or you want to have your question answered, please email me. My email is info@punitbhatia.com. You can also share this with others, and if you do so while tagging me in, I will personally thank and acknowledge your contribution in coming episodes. Thanks once more, and look forward to seeing you back. Till then, stay safe, stay blessed and stay happy.